Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and today is our 11th episode on the history of Rome. So last time we saw that the Republic was now well and truly dead with the rise of Augustus as Rome's first official emperor. We also saw that Augustus's path to power had been paved by his great uncle Julius Caesar. And even though both of these men were now dead by the time the year 14 AD rolled around, their names and their legacies would live on and echo down the ages of Roman history. For example, every future emperor would take at least one of their names as part of their official title. So for example, the later Roman Emperor Hadrian's full title was Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus Augustus. Then, even later in Roman history, when there were multiple emperors at the same time, spoiler alert, one of them was called the Augustus and the other was called the Caesar. Then, even later in the Middle Ages, the Germans and Russians both took the name Caesar and used it to form their own word for king. But I think we can all agree that above all, what would make these men proudest today is to know that their names are forever associated with greedy German boys who love chocolate and cheap, greasy pizza. So after the death of Augustus in the year 14 AD, power passed directly to his stepson Tiberius. He became Rome's next emperor, and the fact that he was able to do so without a struggle, conflict, or civil war just goes to show that at this point in Roman history, Rome has now officially become a hereditary monarchy. A monarchy means a country ruled by a king or queen, or in this case, emperor, and hereditary means that power is passed to members of the same family, kind of like the Kardashians. Now, on the plus side, this kind of hereditary system creates stability because you always know who the next emperor is going to be. On the downside, just because you know who the next emperor is going to be doesn't mean they're going to actually be any good. For example, the next two emperors after Augustus were really nothing to write home about, unless you wanted to write home about how awful they were, in which case, it's going to be a long letter. Tiberius, for example, became known as a cruel dictator who abused his power in shocking ways and committed all kinds of indecent acts. And at the end of his life, the Roman people formed a huge mob and shouted, "To the Tiber with Tiberius," meaning that instead of giving him a proper burial, they wanted to take his body and chuck it into the Tiber River that flowed through Rome. That pretty much tells you what they felt about him. After the death of Tiberius, power then passed to Augustus's great-grandson, a guy named Caligula, which is actually a nickname meaning little boots. It's a really cute nickname, and he got it because when he was a little kid, he liked to visit the soldiers in their army camps, and he would wear his own little pair of army boots around the camp. However, his name is pretty much the only thing about Caligula that's cute, and if I were to tell you anything that he's famous for in any kind of detail, this video would need to have a parental advisory sticker. So moving on, at the end of his life, Caligula was killed by the Roman guards, along with much of his family, because they were so fed up with his gross excesses as emperor, and as a result, his old uncle Claudius became the next ruler. Now, Claudius had actually had to bribe the Roman guards into proclaiming him emperor, and the reason for this was because he really wasn't anybody's idea of what a ruler should be. You have to understand that back in the days of ancient Rome, traditional masculine strength was valued above almost everything else. And because Claudius had a limp, a stutter, and was hard of hearing, this really put him at a disadvantage in the eyes of many Romans. However, much to their surprise, Claudius turned out to actually be the best emperor yet since Augustus. He built aqueducts that brought fresh running water into Rome, improving the sanitation and cleanliness of the city. He helped improve Rome's legal system, and he even ended up conquering the southern half of the island of Britain, i.e. modern-day England, which was something that not even Julius Caesar had been able to do. So there you go, big props to my man Claudius. However, Claudius's undoing was his choice of a wife, namely his fourth wife, a woman named Agrippina. You see, Agrippina already had a son from a previous marriage, who was a teenager by now, and Agrippina really wanted him to become the next emperor. However, she had to deal with the inconvenient fact that Claudius was still alive. And so to take him out of the way, legend has it that she fed him a poisoned mushroom one night for supper, thus earning herself the title of Rome's Black Widow, although not that kind of Black Widow. So with his stepfather Claudius out of the way, the son of Agrippina would now go on to become Rome's next emperor, and he would become one of the most infamous emperors in all of Roman history, a man whose acts of twisted evil and barbaric cruelty still send shivers down our spines 2,000 years later at the very mention of his name. Nero.
Do it again.
Nero. See, I told you. Now, it's not that everything Nero did was terrible, it's just that most of it was. He kicked to death one of his pregnant wives, had his own mother assassinated because he feared she was becoming too powerful, and he used to force wealthy Romans to write him into their wills and then have them executed so he could inherit all their stuff. On the lighter side, Nero also really enjoyed acting in the theater, and he forced the senators to watch him, to which they responded by stuffing their mouths full of leaves so that they wouldn't burst out laughing. Because you know what's going to happen to them if they laugh. But by far the most famous event in Nero's entire reign was the Great Fire of Rome that swept through the city in the year 64 AD. What happened was that a small fire quickly got out of control in the overcrowded, packed city until eventually 1/3 of the entire city had been burnt to the ground. To make matters worse, a rumor spread later that during the fire, Nero had been at the top of one of his towers, reciting a poem about the fall of Troy and playing his harp. This led to the classic saying, "Nero fiddled while Rome burned." But that's totally unfair. It was a harp, not a fiddle. Completely different instrument. Now, whether that rumor is true or not is up for debate, but what's not up for debate is that Nero's next action made things way worse than they had been already. Instead of giving the burned out portions of Rome back to the people so they could rebuild their homes, he confiscated that entire section of the city for himself to build his own enormous palace. And when I say enormous, I mean it had at minimum 300 rooms and 50 banqueting halls. Even Donald Trump would be embarrassed. Now, that kind of behavior obviously didn't win Nero any fans, and so in order to deflect criticism, Nero needed somebody else that he could blame for starting the fire. And it just so happened that in Rome at that time was the perfect group of people to take the heat. They were members of a strange new religious cult that had sprung up in the eastern portion of the empire a few decades previously. People didn't know a lot about them for certain, but it was said that they denied the true Roman gods, practiced cannibalism in secret meetings, and worshipped an obscure Jewish carpenter named Christos. And it was from this name that these outlandish outcasts received their own nickname, Christians. And it's these bizarre Christians we'll talk about next time. See you then. Hey everyone, thanks for watching today's episode. It was a lot of fun to put this together, as it always is. Your challenge for this week is to look into the Great Fire of Rome in a bit more detail and see what kind of good things Nero may have done rather than actually fiddling or harping or whichever it was while Rome burned. As always, stay safe, have fun, and we'll see you back here next time.